This is Brent Allan Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com, and this is In Church, INNCHURCH, and the elders at In Church. Mr. Dan Scadam, I call him Montana Dan because he's from Montana, but Dan is with us today, and we have been coming together and discussing questions that we think are of importance. You can find In Church and how to join us on Sundays at commonlawyer.com. Just go to the button that says In Church, and you can take advantage of other things there, that resources, many resources, both audio and in written form. But Dan today said, Brent, we ought to discuss the doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate. The doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate. Well, Dan, what have you heard about the doctrine?
Well, different groups claim it, and it seems to be the proper way that government should operate, but I'm still studying on that issue. That's why I'm asking you, because I think you spent some time with the guy that authored or redid a book.
A book, yeah, and the book was the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate, and it had been written centuries ago. The whole idea came out in a town in Germany called, I don't want to try to pronounce the name of it. It starts with an M, Magdeburg or something like that. And it came down to the government telling people what they had to do, and it was extreme in the view of those that were in the government that were lesser. They weren't as high. That's why they said lesser. That's the way they translate the Latin word. Well, it was written in Latin, the way I get the story. And Matt Trewhella, pastor of a church back in Wisconsin, found a young graduate student that would translate it from Latin. It had never been translated into English. And what happened was, the doctrine says this, that people in government that are not in positions as high as the president, for example, don't have as wide a power as the president, or a governor, for example, like a sheriff. This is a classic example. A sheriff in a local county, he's a lesser magistrate. Not that he's less important, but his scope of jurisdiction geographically isn't as wide. He's sheriff in his county. He's chief law enforcement officer. Yes, chief law enforcement officer in his county. For any of you state attorney generals or United States attorney generals that are listening, no, it's the sheriff. He's the chief law enforcement, not you. He's had some trouble with that. The sheriff's in America. But he can step up and say no and stand between the governor, the president, or some other, or a judge, some high official that wants to use force to come into his county, for example, and force the people to observe federal gun laws, for example. We've had that example, Dan, a lot. I know a county close to home in the Wabash Valley that said this county is a Second Amendment sanctuary. By the decree of the governor, we're not going to enforce certain federal laws that are unconstitutional. That's the doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate in action. You asked me, Matt Trewhella is the one that brought it to the forefront. And I traveled with Matt throughout the state of Alaska. Now, when I say throughout the state of Alaska, there's only so many places where there are towns of any note in Alaska. The rest of them are villages, probably 10,000 villages. We didn't go to those. But we went as far north as Fairbanks, and we traveled 1,800 miles together and stopping in different places, presenting this doctrine. We stopped at one place up there near a place called, it's either Tok or Tuk. Now, people in Alaska will know exactly where it is. It's a well-known place. It's really tiny, not many people there. It's really out in the wilderness. But there was no place in town to have a meeting, and there was a one tavern in this little, it was kind of a village tavern. And they had a pool table in there. I remember that. And we sat around the pool table, had chairs set up, and made our presentation. I was there to introduce Matt and introduce the doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate. Well, does that explain kind of what it is?
Yes. I think according to what I understand, the real authority for governing life, except for defined things, starts at the county, or starts in the home, and then works backwards. So,
well, yeah,
the name is maybe a misnomer.
Well, it's kind of fancy because they pull it out of that fancy document written by those highly educated reformers in Germany. And then we try to translate it in English, and it sounds fancy, but the truth is, you make a good point. What about fathers? Are they magistrates? Are they?
In the home.
Yeah, well, in the home. But what if something, what if something threatens your family and you're outside the home? You're not standing inside the four walls of your house. Do you have a duty to stand between government power and your family?
Your duty, yes.
Well, here's what comes to mind with me. And if the government comes and says, we got to have your children. Oh, you do? What do you need them for? Well, we want to educate your children. And if you don't send them to the public system, the government school, we're going to throw your carcass in jail. And you say, well, no, I don't believe that. And I think that I, by law, have a duty, God's law, and even the laws of man, to control the education of my children, and I'm not sending them to school. Well, if you feel that way about it, then we're going to bring a truant officer out here, and we're going to get you arrested, and we're going to throw you in jail. Now, you wouldn't want that, would you? Well, no, I wouldn't want that, but at the same time, I'm telling you, I'm not sending my children to public school. Well, why not? Well, it's what God wants me to do. He didn't want me to do that. But not only that, the laws of our state say that. And they come back then with policemen and guns and stuff like that, and they arrest you and throw you in jail. And then you get your bail. You have somebody go your bail, and you get out, and then you appeal. You appeal to the courts, and the courts rule against you. And then you appeal to the appellate court, and the appellate court rules against you, and it winds its way through, and it winds up in the Supreme Court of the United States. And your argument is, the government doesn't have a right to tell me how to educate my children. That's my business, and I want them out of my life. And the government agrees with you. The Supreme Court of the United States agrees with you. And they say, no, this fellow has a right. You can't come in here and take your children away from him. No, that really happened. The case I just described really happened. And the name of the case was Wisconsin versus Yoder. He was a Amishman, or as they say in some places, an Amishman. And Mr. Yoder said, I'm not going to send my children to your government school. He went to the Supreme Court of the United States, and he won. Well, was he operating as a lesser magistrate and standing between the government and his children? What do you think?
I think so, yes.
I do too. I'd never thought of it. Pardon?
At great peril.
At great peril. And I had never thought of it that way about that case until you mentioned the family and the fathers. I said, wait a minute, that's what fathers are supposed to do. Now, the way I described it when I'd introduced Matt Trewhella, I want to repeat his name, Matt Trewhella. I like Matt. Treuwe. I don't know how to spell it. Wella, I think, is on the end, or something like that. I think it's a Cornish name, by the way. Cornish. Trewhella. But I just demonstrated it this way. I'd talk about John Knox. John Knox was the leader of the Reformation in Scotland, but he was trained as a Roman priest, and when he finally understood the gospel through the writings of some earlier men like John Huss from Bohemia and places like that, he said, wait a minute, this is stupid. And there was another fellow there in Scotland that was preaching, but they wouldn't let him preach in the church buildings or the cathedral, so he just went out in the open fields and preaching. Of course, when he'd do that, the government was getting, the powers that be were getting upset. And so he said, John Knox, he said, listen, you got long arms. Matter of fact, Knox had arms longer than his legs. He's one of those funny looking kind of guys. And they gave him one of those great big swords that you can use to make split personalities out of people, you know, two-handed kind of sword. And he stood in front of this preacher while he preached so people wouldn't hurt him, try to kill him. That was his first job in Christian ministry. Well, John Knox eventually became the leader of Scotland, and the Queen of Scotland was afraid of him. He was so popular. God did that. He didn't do that. But he stood between the preacher and the crowd. And the doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate is the doctrine that says that if a man has responsibilities for the welfare of other people, he is to stand between whatever would harm them as a lesser magistrate in his position, whether it be the sheriff, a state legislator, a congressman, a lawyer. A lawyer is an officer of the court. He stands between whatever would harm his client and makes argument. Now, the case that came up real strong and not too many years past, Dan, well, probably now 10 years past or more, happened down in Kentucky, where my mother's family's from, real close by, near the famous Hazard County, I think. It was Fleming. I think there's Fleming County down there. That's where Mom's family's from. And it had to do with same-sex marriage, and the clerk in the little courthouse in that little county there in the hills said, I'm not going to issue, well, I remember the story, I'm not going to issue marriage licenses to people that are of the same sex. And they said to her, well, you got to. It's the Supreme Court's rule, the state's rule, everybody's rule. It's the law of the land. He said, well, you may think it's the law of the land, but I don't, and I'm not going to do it. I'm a Christian gal, and I'm the clerk here that issues the marriage licenses, and I'm not going to do it. Well, she was elected to a county office like the sheriff, and she stood between the people of her county and the government that was trying to force her. Another example, Dan, you remember Judge Roy Moore?
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had a little thing he'd made in high school shop class when he was in high school, had the 10 Commandments on it. I think that's the way the story goes. And they had it sitting on his desk in his office. And they went after him for that. And he won that round. And then he became Supreme Court Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama. And at his own expense, he hired a fellow to make a replica of what he made in shop class of the 10 Commandments. Only this thing was huge and it weighed a few tons. I think it was made out of granite or something. And he had that brought in at his own expense. Had that brought in and set right in the rotunda of the Supreme Court building in Alabama. Well, then they really went after him. And he, for a long time, stood between the people of the state of Alabama and the madness of government. Eventually, his colleagues on the court got scared, and some federal judge in Alabama said, no, you got to remove him. I remove that. I'm giving you an order. Well, he said, you're a federal judge. I'm the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the state. What authority do you have over me? I remember all these arguments. This is what it comes down to. And what it ultimately comes down to, Dan, in my studied opinion, is who's got enough force to make this happen? Who's willing to apply force to make it happen? And the Fed said, we'll bring in the U.S. Marshals, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, whatever we got to bring in, we're going to get this thing out of here. And as a justice of the court, he didn't have Very little, very little power of force. That's what it comes down to. If it ever comes down to a shooting match, comes down to the final analysis, it's going to come down to a standoff of force. Well, that's my opinion, but it is important that somebody stands up who doesn't have a lot of power of force and just says no. You want to be a lesser magistrate? I say just don't agree with Clown Town. You know, America has become Clown Town. Just stupid. Stupid, saying stupid things, doing stupid things, and going along with the stupidity just because you don't want the hassle of having to fight it. We know it's a lie. They know it's a lie. The evil empire. They know we know, and we know they know it's a lie, and we just keep doing it anyway. Put a diaper on your head so you won't die. Back during COVID, and everybody did it. They knew better. Come on. Well, I didn't. I know you may have been stupid. I realize that, but there are many people who knew better and did it anyway. I talked to one lady outside of a Walmart locally. She was standing outside with a mask on, and I'd heard if I go to Walmart, they might not let me in, you know. And well, I was going to go in anyway, had things to do. I never wore a mask once. Didn't want to. Why? Well, it's a religious thing with me, Dan. God gave me the breath of life, and to impede the breath of life is to despise the giver of the gift. Well, I saw a lady standing outside. One was standing there. She'd pull her mask back and was smoking a cigarette, and then she'd put her mask smoking, you know. Another lady standing there, and I said, you know, I know nobody's ever told you this, but you look good in that mask. And she had some kind of a fancy mask that had, you know, designs on it and stuff. And she said, and she pulled it down, and she looked at me serious and said, you know, I don't like to wear this mask, but I didn't want to look stupid. And I said, well, don't look now, sis, but you're not looking real bright, in my opinion. But I still think the mask looks nice on you. You know, I said something nice. But people, she was doing it because everybody else was doing it. She didn't want to do it. And now this is true. I got to tell the rest of the story. I went in Walmart, and I got whatever I was getting, a little thing of some kind, and didn't amount to much. I came out, and the lady at the cash register had a mask on, and she looked like she'd have to stand up twice just to make a shadow. She was that thin. She had emphysema or something. And she'd pull her mask down and take a few breaths, and she'd put it back on. I said, is that thing bothering you? She said, yeah. She said, I can't breathe. I said, well, have you told your boss? Yeah, they said I got to wear it or they're going to fire me. I said, well, why is it bothers you? She said, I have lung problems. And she said, I'm getting weaker. It was pathetic. And she wanted a job, and they were torturing this poor woman. Now, she may have caused the problem. I know, but we all sin. Maybe she smoked all her life. But that doesn't mean you're supposed to abuse people that can't get enough air. That's the stupidity and the hatred of the evil empire. Well, it's my duty to stand up and say no. No, I'm not wearing a mask. If you think you have convictions about it, well, tell me your experiences. You were in the state government. Did you ever see that happen? So you're a legislator. Were your points of view popular when you were in the state government?
No. Well, by a few people, but no, largely no.
So let me ask this, were your views popular among your fellow legislators?
No, well, no. It was a small amount.
Okay. Were your views popular among your constituents in your legislative district?
Not all of them.
So you don't think you had a clear majority on your positions?
Maybe a simple majority.
Do you think, well, so you were there. Do you see yourself looking back? We're talking about the doctrine of the lesser magistrate. Did you consider yourself a magistrate in a lesser powerful position than, for example, the governor or the courts?
I guess I never really thought of it back then. No, a legislator is an equal. It's a legislative group is a group, but it's a co-equal branch of government, and I understood that.
Yeah, you make a good point. But 10 years ago, I know double, triple what I knew 10 years ago. I feel that way. And as you get older, your confidence in what you know comes faster. Just because of your experience, and you didn't realize, well, I did know a lot, and I didn't even know I knew. But and here you are too, and you're, I know, not getting any younger. But well, I would say though, well, no, I won't say what I would say. I'll ask you: do you think that you had opportunity there to stand between powerful people and powerful institutions that were wanting to do things that you didn't think were right? I stand between them and the people of your legislative district.
Yes, I believe so. Most of what I did was vote no. So we voted yes to kill bad things, but voted no most of the time to stop crazy stuff. That was back when the marijuana thing was really pushed hard. First they went for medical, now it's recreational. The pro-life issue was always a heated battle. So yeah.
You did in a way, in regard, I know co-equal branches, I understand what you're saying, but you did stand between people that wanted to do something that was unlawful and the people of your district and of your state.
Well, define lawful. Is it God's law or man's errant law?
Well, yeah, well, there were people that wanted to push things through the legislature, make them look like law by passing them through the legislature. And you, in a lot of cases, just punched a button that said no. Did you have buttons you punched?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. You had a yes button and a no button, right?
Yep. Red and green.
Red and green. And okay, green is yes. Is that what it was?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Now, all the people that haven't been in legislative chambers don't understand how this is done, but it's done by a button. They say those voting yay push the green button. Is that the way they do it?
Correct. And it's yay and nay.
Okay,
red and green.
When I was running for office, I used to say, "Listen, folks, you could train a chimpanzee to punch the no button when they bring up a tax bill. It's not that tough, and it's not. But if you'll pay me, I'll do that. You'll pay me, I'll punch the no button. We've got a lot of taxes. We're misusing the money. What we need to do is just punch the no button. But it's amazing that people in the legislative bodies don't do that. Now, as simple as it is, you were getting paid to punch the no button. That's all you had to do, right?
Pretty much.
And it comes down to yay or nay. And when it comes down to sodomy and same-sex marriage, it's yay or nay. No. I just say no. When it comes to that, I say no. That's all you have to say. You don't have to be in the legislature to say that. You just need to say it. Say it in your family. Say it to your friends. Say it at your church. And you don't have to go looking for trouble. You say those kind of things, and the evil empire gets your number, and they'll come after you.
Yes, they do.
Well, we were talking this morning and talking about people that do that. And they're not looking for a fight. I'm not looking for a fight. You're not looking for a fight. We just know what we believe we know what we believe to be true and what is true. But America has moved to Clown Town, Clownville. And if you want to see it in spades, just look in the news right now. 25, listen to this, Dan. I did the math. About 25 square miles of California have burned up. And that's not out in the middle of nowhere. That's right in the heart of the metropolitan Los Angeles area. 25 square miles. No water in the fire hydrants because there's no water in the reservoir. There's no water in the reservoir to fill the fire hydrants because the powers that be ran them all out to the sea. No water coming down from Mount Shasta area, down the aqueducts in the valley to Los Angeles. They ran it all out to the sea. Why? Well, it had something to do with some slug or snail or something. I don't know. I read it. It's silliness. Don't tell me that they even care. They don't. They were trying to, here's what I see they were trying to do, having driven through the valley in recent years. They're trying to starve the farmers out so they don't have any water. But that's clown.
Well, they're trying to starve out anybody that has an entrepreneurial thought, I think.
Oh, no question, because they can't. I see your point. And if you have an entrepreneurial thought, not entrepreneurial, but entrepreneurial, I've got to plug my juice in here.
I wasn't good at English.
Me neither. I haven't spoken English in years, as one fellow said. Well, English anyway. But people that would be entrepreneurial might make a little money, and then they might support the idea of free enterprise and freedom to work, and they don't want that, so they got to shut them down. Farmers, we don't like them. They're a little more independent. They're trying to grow food, and we want to control the food, so we're just going to shut them down. I see clearly that's what that was all about. We want to get at the conservative people that make California a wealthy nation. When I was in school, you've heard me say I was in the FFA, Future Farmers of America, when I was in high school. And I remember learning that California at that time, that's been a lot of years ago, but California was seventh among nations, not states, nations of the world in agricultural production. The money input of agricultural production, because their crops there's a lot of them, that valley's big, and the crops they raise there are high-end crops that bring a lot of money for human consumption, not just like where I'm from. It's corn and wheat and barley and oats and stuff that you feed. People eat some of it, but livestock eats a lot of that. California is a wealthy place, and they want to shut them down. Dan, the Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate was the subject here. I don't know that we covered everything about it, but the idea is the guy that doesn't have as much power in government has a responsibility to stand between the government and people he's responsible to try to stop the government from abusing. And it comes down to just a simple act of saying no. Now, you tell me what you think about that. That's what you were doing in the legislature. I mean, you couldn't come in there with a pistol and tell people how to vote and hold a gun to their head, and they couldn't do that to you, or they couldn't get away with it. So what you had, the power you had, was to say yes or to say no. But that's power. Well, yep. I'd say you were acting in the capacity of a lesser magistrate, not lesser in importance. But if you hadn't, lesser in the sense that if you hadn't done that, powerful persons with more physical force and power than you would have done something that you didn't agree with. Well, for what it's worth, that's what I think of it. Well,
it's interesting you brought up that slug or snailfish or whatever it is that's stopping the water in California.
Uh-huh.
I'm a trustee on the local co-op, electric co-op, and out west, northwest, the current administration made a deal with some of the agencies and the native tribes to breach the dams on the big rivers up there. And their supposed talking points is to save the fish and the whatever. But the statewide association did a write-up on the salmon problem, and by running water over the top of dams, which generates no electricity, they're plunging those fish, the salmon, way too deep in the water, and it throws off their equilibrium or whatever, and then they're stunned, and then their birds and stuff prey on them, and it kills far more than what they ever are saving. But they don't want to talk about that. And they've developed turbines in those generators that really high, 90% fish can pass through those turbines and survive.
Wow. So did the thing
Plus they barge them around, and so the fish issue is really a non-issue. It's just they're trying to destroy the economy with deep, clean power there in that circumstance. So I guess in that role, I'm a lesser magistrate on in my duty at the co-op, kind of.
Well, no, I see that. Yeah. So that's the way I take it too. By the way, you're talking about this, the way I understand it, the man calling himself governor, that's a loose term, calling himself governor in California, vowed that he would blow up, I forget how many dams that were damming water up on the Klamath River and other rivers up in the northern part of the state, and blew them up because the environmentalists wanted to, because the fish, whatever fish they were talking about, they said were more important than the folk that lived there that had water and electrical power. Fish are more important than people. Listen, friends, I'm going to say this, Dan. I don't want to forget. You got two choices in life. You can do what the maker of heaven and earth says, or you can do what he's the creator, or you can do what some part of creation you're thinking is telling you. You want to worship Mother Earth and worship fish and worship trees and be a tree hugger. And if you do that, you're doing it with some ideas of men, not of the creator who understands our creation, knows how to make it safe, knows how to preserve the animals that are on it, tells us in the Bible how to preserve the animals. He tells us these things. When I was growing up, we had neighbors. They just hunt everybody's property. But you didn't dare go on theirs, they'd shoot you or something. But they tramped everybody else's, and they'd get out hunting quail, and they'd scare up a covey, and then they'd blast a couple out of the air, pick them up, put it in their hunting jacket, and then they'd see where that the quail went up and then come down, then they'd walk forward and they'd scare them up again, shoot a couple more, and they'd just dog that covey of quail until they wiped them out. The Bible clearly says don't do those kind of things. The Bible says if you find a bird in the nest, well, you don't kill the mother. You don't take all the little ones. There's a balance in God's law about how to deal with nature. And he tells us. Who on the left is even talking about these ancient documents we call the Bible, where God has chosen to reveal how to deal with nature, how to preserve so we can enjoy, And the few people, and you know who's been best at doing that, Dan, in our country, all the years we've been here? It's been the farmer and the rancher. And he has incentive to do that. He has incentive not to let all of his topsoil wash away. Nobody else has that incentive nor that understanding. They don't care. Why would they? There's no skin off of their back either way. Well, just making some observations, but we've lost that attitude and that point of view. The doctrine of the lesser magistrate. If you have land, and no matter where you are, you're sitting on a piece of land, and you live there and you're responsible for it, don't abuse it. I don't care whether it's a hovel and a shack that you're renting or squatting in. Don't abuse real estate and land. Don't waste it. I think that mindset is what God can put into a people. He can do that. And we should pray for it and do it ourselves. Well, Dan, you're on the co-op there. You'll have other opportunities, I'm sure, but the fish are going over the top. The salmon are going over the top of the dam. They're being breached now.
They're running water over the top, and it's killing fish, which they're the appointed protectors of the fish, but they don't care. They don't care about the fish.
Well, are there tribal people and non-tribal people on the co-op?
Not in our area. but in other areas there are. This was all done at our president, the guy in the White House, made a deal, secret deal, and it kind of got found out.
Oh.
And he didn't allow an agreement with the state and 2 3-letter agencies and the tribes, which is totally out of his authority, control, oath of office, all of that.
But he has power and influence.
Yeah.
So then
abused power.
Yeah, then I'd say, well, if you're on the board and you don't agree, you have a duty to stand up and say no and stand between the fish and the people that enjoy the fish and the President of the United States. Would you be, in that case, as a member of the board of this co-op, as the old book says, a lesser magistrate?
Yeah. Practically speaking, our co-op doesn't have any influence in that area, but if a co-op in that area would, a generation co-op.
Well, that's the way I understand the doctrine of the lesser magistrate, and really it applies to everybody. Anybody who stands up and says no, you have a duty to say no to what is evil and yes to what is good. I would say anybody would function in that capacity as a freeman in our country. You are a freeman, and you have a duty to say yes or to say no. If you're on a jury, here's another one. You're on a jury. I've had fellows tell me they've done this, and they're prosecuting somebody who unlawfully, and they want to send him to jail. If you're on the jury, do you have a duty to say, now, wait a minute? No. They have not proved this beyond a reasonable doubt. It may look like he did it. I may even think he did it, but it's clear to me that they didn't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and I say no. That's the doctrine of the lesser magistrate too. Grand jury, jury. My policy is say no to the government. My presumption in my mind is against whatever the government's wanting to do. Doesn't mean they're wrong, but I start with, you're going to have to prove to me, Mr. Government, that you're right. The burden is not on me to prove that you're wrong. And that's what our courts have come to now. It didn't used to be that way, but ever since Franklin Roosevelt, the courts have given a presumption. It began then to give a presumption of lawfulness to everything the government wants to do, the laws, the regulations, and then puts the burden on me, if I don't like it, to go into court and overcome that. And it has become almost utterly impossible to do.
So wasn't that how why the courts or our laws were set up, that the government had to, beyond a doubt, prove?
It should have been that way.
So we should, as our founders expected, we should be skeptical, not anti-government, but skeptical of what they're bringing forth, right?
I agree. To do what God wants, you're not anti-government. The best thing for good government is to be skeptical against the powerful party. Skeptical against the powerful party and make them prove the rightness and the lawfulness of what they're doing. As they say in the common law, the writ quo warranto. By what authority are you doing this? If we have that mindset, you got to be careful. You can get thrown in jail. First time this happened to me, I was sitting in a building where my office was, and I was sitting early in the morning where they had donuts in a room out front, and other people that had offices there would come out and get coffee and drink donuts. I remember old Harry Woolen sitting there. He's almost 100 years old now, and that has been a long time ago. And Harry said, he got a cup of coffee. He said, Brent, this coffee will talk to you. And I'd never heard that before. That was years ago. And I knew what he meant. In other words, it was powerful coffee, it'll talk to you. I said, okay, Harry. Well, we sat down, and Harry, he's same age as my father, born same year, a World War II vet. Harry went, he's still living. He's the head of the American Legion there in his little town, and he went to Europe. Anyway, he said that to me, and then all of a sudden we were sitting around this little table, kabam, kabam, and it sounded like somebody was opening doors and slamming them against the wall, and all of a sudden we were surrounded by men with drawn guns, flak jackets, yeah, and pointing them at us too. Now you got a bunch of government agents that are nervous because they don't know what they're doing, and they got 9mm pistols, and they got their fingers on the triggers, and you're just sitting there trying to relax and talk to your friend, old Harry. And another fellow was sitting there, and they said, "Who's so-and-so?" I won't say the name. And this guy said, "Well, I am." Of course, our blood all felt like it turned to water at that point. I've been around idiots with guns. Guns are dangerous, no doubt about that. And you put them in the hands of government, it's even worse. Talk about trust. There was a time in America, Dan. There was a time in America when Americans did not trust the government with firearms and wouldn't let them carry them. There were no policemen with guns in our towns and cities. They carried billy clubs, but they wouldn't let them carry guns. Are you kidding? Well, of course, everybody else carried guns. That was okay. Well, that's part of our common law tradition. But at that point, they came in, raided this guy's office, and then they decided they'd try to raid everybody else's office in the building. They even tried to come into mine. I said, "You can't go in there." Oh, we had quite a tussle. Well, we went to federal court. And they did what they did on the basis of a regulation, not a piece of legislation. And so I challenged them in federal court and said, this is not law, and the burden's on them. This is how I learned that the burden's on me. It hadn't ought to be, but it is. I said, they've got to prove that this regulation that they're following here, which is from the President of the United States, is lawful. And I found out then that no, the burden was on me to prove that it was unlawful, and that's an impossible burden to carry. And the courts won't let you do it anymore. That's the habit. Well, the presumption should always be against the powerful party. I'm quoting Lord Acton when I say that. And the more power the other party has, the greater the presumption against the rightness of their actions should be. And then he said, the greatest and most monstrous doctrine among men is the doctrine that says that the office sanctifies the man. Put a badge on a man and say, I'm a U.S. Marshal, I'm a police officer. All of a sudden, the government says, yeah, everything he does is right, and the burden's on you to prove he's wrong. That's not the law. That's not our common law tradition. That's not the law in America. Well, Dan, what else you got to say about the doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate? And we probably ought to cut this one off, or we'll...
Yep. Yeah. How are we to deal with that? Just keep bloody in our nose? Or...
Well, the one thing about it for sure, we can say no, and we should. Just say no. Just quietly, calmly, just say no, just like you did when you were a legislator. Something come up that wasn't lawful, that they wanted to pass as legislation, you just punched the no button. And your vote then got in the newspaper, and people know, well, old Scadam, he's voting no on this, this, and this. Okay, we like that, because he's trying to stop government. Montana Dan, thank you very much for taking time to get up and make this presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Brent Allan Winters with Montana Dan, Elders at In Church, www.commonlawyer.com.